The Quechua people living in northern South America, who in 500 years have not yet fully assimilated Spanish, will now have to prepare to learn Colomboñol and Iqueñol, and further south, Peruñol, while the Quechua people of the south will have to become quadrilingual with the new Boliñol, Chileñol, and Argentoñol. A similar fate awaits the other 45 million indigenous people in Latin America. But it is not only the culture of the indigenous peoples that will be severely curtailed, but that of everyone. And to think that Iranians and Israelis once spoke the same language, Sunnis and Shiites were also the same, and don't even get me started on Ukrainians and Russians. Historial Presence. Video Book 1. Tools of History. Chapter 1. Extinction of the Common Language. In ancient times, the Iberian Peninsula was inhabited by various ethnic groups speaking different languages, until 218 BCE, when the Roman Empire began to colonize the Iberian peoples, supplanting their diverse cultures with a dominant imperial culture and a single imperial language, which eventually evolved into the Hispanic Latin language. 6 centuries later, beginning in 409, Hispania was invaded by Germanic peoples, primarily the Suebi in the northwest, who ruled for about 170 years, and the Visigoths across nearly the rest of the peninsula for nearly 300 years, until the Muslim invasion of 711. Throughout this period of nearly 1,000 years, although some Germanic words were adopted, the sole Hispanic Latin language continued to be spoken throughout Hispania. It should be noted, however, that beginning in the 6th century, when there was no longer a strong, unified state on the peninsula, a slow, random, diffuse, and imperceptible process began, one that no one noticed or controlled, leading to the differentiation of the common Hispanic Latin language into several other regional languages with their own influences and realities, which we know as Romance languages. The oldest Galician Portuguese Romance language document dates from the year 870, and the language was already spoken in the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula by the early 9th century. Additionally, there is a document containing the so-called Emilianense gloss, written in the late 10th century in the early Castilian Romance language. These are the two major linguistic traditions that would prevail on the Iberian Peninsula, and that would eventually reach the Americas centuries later. For this same historical period, almost nothing is known about what was happening in the Americas, where many ethnic groups lived in isolation from the rest of the world. We can only surmise that the ancient Puquina language, now extinct, was spoken in the Andean region of South America. In Central America, the Mayan language was likely already in use, and the Amazon region, some Proto-Guarani languages were spoken. Little by little, the various Christian kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula reclaimed territories in the south of the peninsula, until after 780 years of Muslim occupation, in the famous year of 1492, they finally expelled the Arabs who, among other things, left behind some 4,000 Arabic loanwords in the Castilian and Portuguese languages, which by then were already firmly established in the east and west of the Iberian Peninsula. On Friday, October 26th of that same year, 1492, just 2 weeks after running aground on the lands that would later be called America, Christopher Columbus wrote in his journal, "The Indians I had with me said that from there it was a day and a half's journey to Cuba in their rafts, which are flatboats made of a single log that do not carry sails. These are the canoes." In his journal of this first voyage, Columbus wrote the word canoa, which the Taino natives used to refer to their boats, 46 more times, preferring it to using a native Castilian term such as almadilla, balsa, or bote. Shortly thereafter, in this early historical document, the words hamaca and cacique appear, which are also among the first Americanisms in the Spanish and Portuguese languages. Christopher Columbus's companions did not take long to notice that the indigenous people of the Caribbean island were smoking rolled-up dried leaves. One of the Spanish sailors, Rodrigo de Jerez, driven by curiosity, began to try this strange practice, becoming the first European to smoke tobacco. And the other Spaniards followed suit with such enthusiasm that when they returned to Spain from this first voyage of discovery, one of the first things they thought to bring back were many of these exotic plant rolls, which the Maya indigenous people called sicar, the origin of the widely used word cigar. Just 8 years later, also crossing the Atlantic Ocean, the Portuguese expedition, led by Pedro Álvares Cabral, reached the shores of South America and encountered dozens of indigenous languages that can be grouped into 3 main language families: Tupi, Guarani, Arawak, and Carib. Less than 3 decades after the Spanish first arrived in the Caribbean islands, Hernán Cortés entered Tenochtitlan in 1519. The capital of the Aztec Empire in the heart of what was, for Europeans, the New World. Amid the bloody conquest, they encountered many other diverse languages here, such as Nahuatl, Yucatec Maya, and other Mayan languages, as well as Zapotec, Mixtec, Totonac, and many other indigenous languages. 3 years later, one of the conquistadors who helped found Panama, Pascual de Andagoya, set out southward along the coast of the other great ocean, which we now call the Pacific, in search of the rumored Great Kingdom of Peru, but due to the hardships of the journey, he was unable to get very far. However, he charted the route that Francisco Pizarro and Diego de Almagro would follow on several conquest expeditions from 1524 until they conquered the Inca Empire in late 1532. During the 10 years that the Spanish conquistadors traveled along the Andean coast of South America, they encountered many other indigenous languages, but primarily Quechua, Aymara, Puquina, and Mochica. Further south, they encountered Mapudungun and Tehuelche. Further east, they encountered Guarani, Chimene, Guarayo, and many other indigenous American languages. In the early centuries of the cultural clash, the wounds of which have yet to fully heal, many words of Native American origin were incorporated into Spanish and Portuguese to name plants, animals, and things that were new to the Iberians, but not to replace words they already had in their European vocabularies. By 2009, when the first dictionary of Americanisms was completed, it was recorded that 70,000 entries and 120,000 definitions or meanings had been incorporated into the Spanish language. More and more Americanisms continue to be incorporated, though these are no longer of indigenous origin, and are almost entirely substitutes for words that already exist in Spanish and Portuguese, with regional idioms that are largely of a libertine nature. For no good reason, people are inventing thousands of new ways to say or name things that we already knew how to say in Spanish or Portuguese. In some countries, the pronunciation of letters from the original Spanish alphabet has even been changed, giving rise to new letters that are completely unnecessary. Once again, the same process that began 1,600 years ago has started anew, slow, random, diffuse, and imperceptible, with no one noticing or controlling it. A process of further differentiation of the common language into regional dialects, but this time without distinct characteristics of their own and with almost no distinct identities of their own. As a result, while indigenous languages continue to die out, the common language is also being lost. Essentially, there was no cultural difference between a Latin American raised in Juarez in northern Mexico, another in Tarija in southern Bolivia, and yet another in Porto Alegre in southern Brazil, and there still isn't one today. Amid carefree, folksy smiles, we are unwittingly destroying one of the greatest geopolitical weapons we inherited long ago, because we are already heading toward the kind of confrontations seen in West Asia, or the Middle East, if you will. And how easy it would be to create a single, unified language, practical, clean, and simple, for nearly 1 billion speakers worldwide, given that there is still a 90% overlap in vocabulary and historical context. I conclude by calling on the Ibero-American linguistic community to work to halt this process of fragmentation into smaller languages, which will inevitably lead to the separation of peoples, causing us to lose the opportunity that our Hispanic history has given us to facilitate development through seamless communication among millions of people. Thank you for your attention. At Astorial.com, you'll find information about conferences, discussions, and specialized courses, both online and in person, in various countries and languages.